Hello and welcome. My name is Elena Narinskaya, and this is the fourth webinar in the series titled Living Christianity Today. The purpose of this series is to provide an open forum for discussing important, timely, and often pressing issues. This is very similar to what we usually do at the Women's Ministries Initiative, an organization of which I'm a founding director. Except this time, we do it in collaboration with Center for Applied Theology, and also we offer this initiative online. Today's general theme for discussion is titled Living Christianity as a Woman. And we have a wonderful selection of guests, panelists, including Professor Mary Cunningham, Dr. Sister Vasa Larian, Professor Carrie Frederick Frost, Dr. Teva Rogoy, and Reverend Professor Andrew Louth, to whom I am addressing my first question. Title of this webinar, Father Andrew, is Living Christianity as a Woman. So my question to you as a pastor, educator, theologian, a person of clergy, an ordained clergy. How is it in contemporary orthodoxy today? How is it the experience of living Christianity without women, or more precisely, without women in ordained ministries, and all that implies? Father Andrew, if you could unmute yourself and possibly answer the question, please.
I think I'm the wrong person to ask. I mean, I could respond to other people thinking about it, but it seems to me that the question of living Christianity as a woman in the Orthodox Church today is something that I really want to know about from women who are trying to do this. I don't think, I haven't got any plan or scheme or anything. I've got various questions about specific issues like what do we think we lose by not having women priests? I could say one or two things about that, but it seems to me that my contribution is much more likely to be useful, I think, if it's in response to some more extended consideration on behalf of from the point of view of those who actually are women living Orthodox.
That is, I can appreciate and respect that as a response. And in that sense, we're not trying to lobby something in particular during this webinar. We've published proceedings of the previous conference when we theologically discussed the question of ordination of women and brought a pastoral perspective, historical perspective, traditional points of view, anthropological as well. So in that sense, we would not be going into the in-depth discussion of this particular matter. On the contrary, what I was trying to bring here is women practicing Christians, and also established theologians and academic scholars. So my next question I will try to address to Professor Mary Cunningham. While I was preparing for these conversations, I read Facebook communications from academic friends of mine when they lamented about the situation and a position of women in academia, where women often are overlooked and disadvantaged because of that situation. And it led me further to think about this world, and this world entering the church, and the experience of women in academia, and the experience of women in the church, and the similarities and differences there, on the one hand. On another hand, I've realized that there is a strong human element within our church. And we have to learn to identify the human element and what it brings and the implications of that, and another influence. And in that sense, learning about disadvantageous positions of women in academia allowed me to believe that church is not to be blamed solely as the institution that offers this or the other position for a woman. And I know it's a complex question, Mary, but I deliberately thought that you might be able to respond to it, having a successful and full career in academia and being a prominent member of the Orthodox Church. Could you talk about the experience of being a woman in academia and experience of being a woman in the church, and maybe elaborate it further as you wish? Thank you.
Well, as you say, Elena, that's a complex question. I have experienced both worlds. I've been lucky enough always to be working within departments in universities in the United Kingdom in which there was a strong female presence. There were other women professors, other women lecturers. So I personally have never experienced whatever it is your friends are experiencing, I would say. I didn't see any discrimination towards women as far as promotion was concerned. There were always, probably in theology departments that I taught in, more women students than male students. And they were fairly vocal and didn't seem to feel disadvantaged as far as I could tell. And I had many good role models from the period when I was an undergraduate onward. I was taught by some wonderful women. People like Caroline Bynum at Harvard University was a great inspiration to me. And other professors when I got to the University of Birmingham, where I did my MA and PhD. Within the Orthodox Church, it's also a kind of paradoxical situation. I think one is more aware of the lack of recognition of women and their role in the church. But at the same time, I have never met so many very strong, very vocal, and very inspiring women as I have during my, I guess it's nearly 40 years as an Orthodox Christian. I was received into the church in Oxford in the early 1980s, having been brought up as a Quaker in the Society of Friends in the United States. So when you say my experience as a Christian, it does include both of those aspects of my life. And I would say in both, I met very vocal, very active women who played important roles, both in the Society of Friends and in the Orthodox Church. And I think of people like Wendy Robinson and just lots of other women who served on the Deanery Assembly, for example, when it was a diocese under Metropolitan Antony. Women were speaking up, they were taking important roles, they were often choir leaders. But the paradox is that I feel intensely frustrated by the fact that the church, in its widest sense, for example, at the Holy and Great Council in Crete in 2016, had only 4 women delegates. And that was in spite of some lobbying beforehand, as I understand, that was all that they could manage. I think there's a huge road to travel towards more recognition and more involvement of women at the highest levels. I'm not just talking about ordination of women, because I think that will take a long time to come, but I think women should be involved in all discussions at every level, whether they're councils, synods, or just parish meetings. And also at academic conferences that are organized by Orthodox bodies, I've often noticed there's a preponderance of men speaking. So I think people who organized conferences need to think carefully and make an active decision to be sure that they have women participants and speakers as well as respondents, and just give that thought. And there needs to be more awareness. So as I say, I think there's room and there's lots of cause for feeling satisfaction and excitement at all the women that we see playing active roles at the moment, and initiatives like the Fordham University interviews with women academics has been inspiring to me. It's ongoing if people don't know about it. I think they're on their 14th female academic interview with lots of varied and interesting women scholars. So things are happening in the Orthodox Church, but we have a long way to go. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. Very, very insightful presentation. My next question I will address to Dr. Tevaroglu. What would be your perspective on women's potential in the church? I know you're specializing in liturgy and in other subjects. Is there anything that women can particularly excel in, ecclesiastically, pastorally, if encouraged and given a chance and guidance and a green light, so to speak? So it would be very important for us to hear your insight on the matter, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. I'm very happy to be here. I want to, I think I can begin, that's a question that can go, I guess, many different directions. First of all, I think that we're all called to holiness and called to ministry, just as a baptized Orthodox Christian. That's something that we're all called to do. I think where it gets most difficult is in the authority given to those in ministry. So, for instance, in the governance of the church, I believe women have made great strides at the local level, in particular, as being part of parish councils, building committees. They bring the strengths that they have from their own individual gifts to serve the church in those capacities. Whereas perhaps to a generation or so ago, all the parish council would have been men and things like that. So they have, they parallel the opportunities and gifts that women are engaging with in society in general in that realm. I think where women have less opportunity and where their own life experience could in fact be beneficial to the church are in two other realms. One of that is in theological education. I think there are very few of our seminaries there are very few women that teach at our seminaries, only one of which I know on a full-time basis. And I think it's important to model and to share your own life experience when you are, in fact, not only grooming those who will become the next kind of generation of clergy and priests and deacons, but also the lay leaders of the church, so they can, in fact, see that you have something to say, and your own life experience may color that perspective just a little bit from an ordained clergy person who may be teaching the class. Similarly, I think that there could be encouraged more women just to study at the seminary level, because they also bring their own experiences that they will share with their colleagues in terms of, that their experience has not been the same as other experiences. And this is particularly true, I think, in the liturgical realm of the church, which is my area of study and perhaps expertise, that women have never experienced some of the things that many males take for granted. For instance, like altar service. It's much different to learn about something that it is to actually experience it and to encounter the liturgy in that way and to be able to give of your gifts. So for altar service, frankly, it's a great educational opportunity. And since in the West and the US, it's open to almost any and all boys and excludes any and all girls, it's just an experience that boys have that girls don't have in terms of really encountering the liturgy. And that can hinder their spiritual development. It can actually speak negatively to the integrity of the church, just because we go to great lengths to, taunt your boys as readers or subdeacons or something to allow them access to the altar. And these are ministries in which they actually don't fulfill in particular. So it does do, I think, damage to the integrity of the church. And it can give boys a pretty good sense of entitlement that girls don't have. And what that could allow, if something like that kind of ministry was allowed to be open to them, is that it would teach boys that this is not just kind of a boys' club, and that basically all are called to serve in these capacities and allow them to fulfill their gifts. So it has both a way to allow women and girls to particularly give of their gifts, and also to teach and model others that this is a ministry that they can model for the church as one of service. So I'm not sure if that addressed your question particularly, but I think that's kind of where my response led me at the moment. And I suppose I should stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deborah. That was an important insight. My next question I will address to Sister Vasa. And I was supposed to address it previously, but there are some difficult questions that I would like to open. And when I was preparing for this communication a while back, I went and spoke to the ordained minister in the Anglican Church. And I said to her, well, you're a little ahead of us. What are the hurdles of the actual situation of women ministries and women clerical ministries? And the most surprising answer that she gave me, she said that quite often the most resistance does not come from men. Quite often, quite a heavy and vicious and strong resistance comes from women. That took me by complete surprise. And I thought I addressed this question to Sister Vasa, and the question is, how do we address women in the church as a body of women, as a united front, so to speak, if there is such a thing, and women resisting their own flourishing in the church or being proactive in the church after such a long tradition, and we often inflate the understanding of tradition, and we don't differentiate the tradition from the capital and tradition of the small or whoever. How can we allow women to flourish and be less preventative from their own ministerial gifts? I know it is a very difficult question. That's why I'm asking it to you, not answering it myself. Thank you.
So thank you, Elena, for inviting me. And it's lovely to see all of these lovely faces, and familiar and beloved ones to me. This is there's so much to say that it's going to be hard to say anything, but I'll begin by saying, yes, I've experienced both, wonderful blessings and yes, recognition and support from wonderful men in the church. I've also experienced emotional abuse from people very high up. I have been called "you stupid woman" 3 times in one email from one of my closest hierarchs in my not so long ago experience. I have experienced a lot of blessings, a lot of negative things as well. So it's a mixed bag. But having just begun that way, I find in my own experience that I don't like to be specifically a woman in the church. I am a woman, you know. Also certain other things, you know, like a brunette, not a blonde. I am someone who wears glasses. I don't know if I am forced to identify with something. Well, let's just stick to circumstances of biological birth. I don't think that our faith teaches us to associate or identify primarily with the circumstances of our biological birth. I think that in the conversation, one of the most informative sort of passages in scripture of the way our Lord approaches us and our vocations, I find is in John 4, in the conversation with the Samaritan woman specifically, even though obviously a lot more can be said about it, but when she attempts to put our Lord in a certain demographic corner and says, how is it that you, identifying him according to certain identities that he might have to be locked into, how is it that you, a Jew, more specifically a Jewish man, right, asks a drink of me, and then she identifies herself as a Samaritan woman, making her both a heretic and, this female, and she's born into both. He responds, if you knew the gift of God, right, in John 4:10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is, who, right, not the what, she's asking about the what. And so for me, I sometimes think being a really self-conscious female would really hinder, I think, the way that I think in our tradition, which really seems to make a big deal of that whole business of overcoming the laws of nature, of calling the mother of God the, groomless bride, or, this conception without seed. I think God began all of this business of reminding us that the be all and end all is not our identity as specifically according to gender. When he did something strange, like forming his covenant with Abraham through taking down a notch that which was considered, excuse me if this is a little bit too racy for anybody, taking down a notch that which in pagan cultures is actually deified. Like if you've been to India, the lingam, there's a phallic symbol that's worshipped, right? Because procreation being this be all and end all before the coming of our Lord of human power, that was it. That was how you could sort of make a difference. So for a female having babies, obviously she couldn't do that without the seed of a man. That was, we were fully dependent on that. But when we sing to the Theotokos that in you are, overcome the laws of nature, I think that the radical thing about that is that you are no longer, I mean, yes, it might mean that your head will roll and you will be martyred, as so many of the early Christian martyrs were. Why? Because they didn't want to get married. The typical, virgin martyr, the one that refuses to get married. I don't know, usually like half of them, for some reason, Diocletian seems to fall in love with, and exceptionally beautiful women and so forth, but they refuse. And so there's a celebration of not going along with what was considered your vocation, not from God, but from your circumstances of birth. Okay, so in our day, when also things, we do have certain, obviously, biological characteristics when we're born, but it's not the be all and end all, regardless of the fact that there are certain elements of tradition people, I think, in modern day Orthodoxy often lose sight of the fact that there is changeability in tradition insofar as that which is traditioned, right, from tradere to pass on, that which is traditioned happens in a certain changeable historical context. So both language changes, but also the way in which the message and the life in Christ is passed on, it is inevitably changeable. And I think that priesthood and various ministries, we know even, the transition from what we see described in the book of Acts to already in the 2nd century, the way ministries developed, the way we understand certain ministries, but the very radical change from Levitic priesthood that the author of Hebrews is at pains to somehow justify that the new, order of priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek, that it's now changed, no longer limited to a certain, bloodline, but extended in Christ. I'm not going to go into the whole can of worms of, female ordination, but I do want to say that we can safely say that the question of who, has a priestly ministry definitely changed, not only in the sense of the royal priesthood of everybody, but when changes do occur, I think that the pushback, right, that happens, and it always, I think, happens when change happens, it has to go, there has to be martyrdom, there has to be a profession, a courage to follow a call coming not from man, right, coming from God. And that vocation, I think, without us thinking what or endlessly talking about who's doing it, but you just do it. And that kind of martyria, I think, is what is needed, to just do it, because, there are not enough workers, but the harvest is great. There's plenty to do. The possibilities also of the internet offering a space that's not, there is no like sanctuary into which you're not allowed to set foot. And, you can share of yourself in different ways, but I do find that it can be very painful. I do find that it seems to not count. There is not, a priest who might be, who does, preach, teach the people, carry his cross and his ministry, might get, in our Russian tradition, regularly supported, which I think is a good thing. He gets the next, a silver cross, then a gold cross, then a cross with like gems on it, then a special hat, then another special hat. And he's, encouraged because, yay, you've survived another 2 years. Here's another, bejeweled thing. So I think that the lack of ordination is a problem, not for reasons of offering power or authority to women. I mean, you can't muster up authority, or no, I don't think that anybody could give it to you. It's one of those things that there's a different way that happens. However, I do think, as Teva touched upon, that the question is thwarting someone else in their vocation. If you try to stop, smother a flower when it's blossoming, you're doing damage to God's creation. And from a pastoral sense, it does damage, I think, to not take these ministries that are already being done, right, by a lot of us, and somehow to integrate them so that you are part of the team, aren't you? Or are you not? Because I find in this ministry that you're not considered part of the team. The church doesn't seem to have your back in certain, just like, in various ministries, there are attacks and there is support that's needed. Forget about the financial support. I mean, just the spiritual support. I think that there's a positive side to not being really part of clergy as a woman, because you're not. Even if you're a monastic, you're not part of clergy. The good thing is that that liberates you to a certain degree. You're just sort of running wild, you know? But I think it's a more conservative and traditional stance to say the ministries are being done because that's part of the context of our historical time, that women get an education. You know, the day before yesterday, that just wasn't the case, that majority of women would be highly educated and able to do ministries like teaching theology. But, you know, it is traditional for the church to harness and also bless ministries that are being done. Anyway, I think that's actually a conservative stance. It's mistaken for something very out there and liberal to say, but there would be more order, taxis, in that, for there to be some kind of, you know, blessing of it. I feel that it's damaging actually to vocations not to have, you know, not to have the support, not to have a guiding hand in the ministries that inevitably are being done because women are growing up to be already for several generations to be educated, to be able to do certain priestly ministries.
Thank you very much, Sister Vasa. A very intense communication. And before I give a floor to Carrie, Teva asked for a short interlude and for a short response to the question as well. Teva.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Sister Vasta, for your remarks. One of the things I wanted to say to this question is it's a question particular for women. So in the church, men are not disallowed from doing anything because they are men. I mean, there might be other reasons that they, for instance, can't seek ordination or something like that, but not because they're male. For women, it's a particular question because they are disallowed from doing so many things merely because they're women. So this is kind of the atmosphere in which we find ourselves. And whether the rules are written or unwritten, in terms of they're much more acutely aware of their ministerial bounds and limits than men. And I have found in my own speaking that some of the pushback to some of these newer areas of ministry for women have often come from women who are quite involved in the church. And there's something about, there might be, I've come to rationalize that there's perhaps some kind of psychological thing at work here, where somehow they feel as if because you want to open up other ministries for women, whether it's preaching or whether it's for young girls to participate in altar service, that somehow it's somehow devaluing their own ministry, as if what they are doing is not enough or is not valuable. And I think that is, first of all, it's wrong. I mean, we're not saying that, but that we have to be sensitive to that they have made their own peace with what they do and what they're allowed and what they do for the church. And oftentimes they do quite a bit for the church, but that it's seen as a threat. And I think that that's the thing, that's the way, that's the area or the arena in which we also have to allow space for them and to be able to assure them that we're not saying that, and that we are in fact value their service, whether it was in the kitchen or whether, you know, secretarial work or whatever they had done to keep the church operating, because many women do those things and keep the church's doors open by doing so. So I just wanted to kind of bring that flip side into the conversation, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teva. And I also want to bring to everyone's attention the laudatory remarks to Sister Vasa's conversation. A lot of people were agreeing, saying amen to what she was saying, and were offering their support to what has been said. And we very much appreciate the feedback from the audience in whichever capacity it is offered. My next question would be to Dr. Carrie Frederick Frost, forgive me. And this was, again, I have to address the question carefully, and I was trying to talk about the Institute of the Mother of God and the veneration of Mother of God, which we hold dearly in our Orthodox tradition. But sometimes she is put away from the rest of the women, and she becomes the woman of purity and veneration, which distance her even further away from the rest of the women who will never live up to that high pedestal, worthy pedestal. But there is a problematics that were brought to me decades ago from some of my friends in conversation again, and she said, there is a problematic of the Institute of the Mother of God in the Orthodox Church in relation to the position of the rest of the woman. And I'm not sure whether bringing this example of Mount Athos would bring clarity to the picture, but nevertheless, I will tell you the folklore story, or the story that is often projected in relation to the prohibition of women to enter the premises, as this is the Mother of God who appeared to one of the monks in Mount Athos and said, I am the only woman to be allowed in this premises, so make sure no other woman. And they protect this rule religiously, and we have to respect that. What I'm saying is that this could have been helpful for this as a typology, could have been helpful for men in their religious journey. And with all due respect, is there anything that can be done at this point in our living Christianity as a woman, that we can reclaim a Mother of God and live under her protection and inspiration and guidance, rather than being separated in a way? And it's a difficult question to vocalize, but since you're nodding, Carrie, I'll stop unraveling and just give you the Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful question, Elena. And first of all, let me start off by saying thank you for hosting this event and for creating a venue in which to discuss all these wonderful questions and difficult issues. Thank you, Father James, for having us here. And thank you to my panelists, whom I esteem so greatly and admire so much. And for all of the audience participants here, it's just wonderful to be here with everyone. I want to, if I may, Elena, just briefly say two things in response to the conversation that's happened so far that I think are valuable things to add, and I'll do so briefly. One is I just want to make a meta comment to say that, you know, one of the biggest problems I think when it comes to women in our church is that we have just simply failed to live up to our theology and our anthropology. You know, we have this wonderful understanding of the human person that Sister Vasa elucidated for us. And in our practices and some of our teachings and some of our thought in terms of women, you know, we have often failed to live up to that, and just simply admitting that that's the case. Being willing to say that, to me, is one of the crucial parts to addressing the reality of women in the church today. And I do want to point out that the Ecumenical Patriarch released a document last year on which I had the honor of working, that simply does admit that. And to me, this is a huge step for a document to come from a patriarchate that does actually voice this, that the church has failed to live up to its ideals when it comes to women. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I want to say is that these matters of women in the church, when it comes to women's lives and roles and ministries and bodies, are never just women's issues. For this reason that we've talked about of personhood, these matters are matters about all human beings, about how we understand our bodies, about how we understand sin, about how we understand the incarnation. And so these are cosmic issues that permeate the entire church and affect all of us. And so I don't want to ever see us, and I don't think we're doing that here, but I just want to, give a reminder of this, to constrain these issues to be just women's issues or anything like that, because they affect all of us and they're urgent in this way. Okay, so those are the two things I want to say. And now I'll go on to the Mother of God, and I think this is related actually. So here's what I think. I think that we do the Mother of God and all of us a disservice when we paint her as only someone to be looked up to just for women. The Mother of God is really the model of all humanity. And this is the way that she was understood in the early church, is that she was the preeminent ideal of humans. She was the model for all of us, for men and for women, for everyone. And I'm hoping maybe Mary Cunningham will jump in next, because when I look to someone to understand Mary, I look to Mary Cunningham. And I think that there have been, the way I understand this is in the last maybe 100 years or so, there have been certain thinkers, both outside and inside the Orthodox Church, Paul of Documov comes to mind, who have held Mary up as a model for women in a kind of new and particular way. But I think that we need to maybe retrieve her as a model for all humanity, and open her back up in this way, rather than, because I think confining her to just women does this disservice to us that you described in this question that you set up for me, Elena. And then I think the other thing that is so helpful to us is to remember that we have this incredible cloud of witnesses around us, of all these other women saints that give us so many examples of how to live a good Christian life for men and for women. And I'm going to just tell you a quick story, which is that someone gave my family a saints of a day calendar kind of thing, where on each day you open it up and there's a little biography of a saint. And we got about, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of the way through January, and I didn't say anything, but my children noticed, wow, it's mostly men, one of the children pointed this out. And so they actually went through and counted the saints in the calendar. And I think it was something like 82% of the saints in the calendar were men. The people who had put this calendar together chose men for the calendar. And so we in our family are involved in a little project of making a women's saints calendar. This came from my children. This was their project that they wanted to do. We are sitting down and we're creating this. And this is the work, our family is doing this, but this is the work of the church, is to find these stories and raise them up. We need them, we need to hear them. Women need to hear them, men need to hear them, children need to hear them, all of us need to hear them. This is the kind of work that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I received messages from Elizabeth Theokritov. She is quoting Chesterton, saying, "Men are men, but man is a woman." And following on with perception of the Theotokos as a historical issue as well, referring to Byzantine Empire, language, hymnography of the Theotokos versus Syriac Christian world, referring to work of Susan Ashbrook Harvey. And Syriac Mary is the mother of the poor, not so much imagery of empire, power, queenliness. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Mary, would you like to respond to the invitation of Carrie here?
I'd just like to thank her for saying exactly what I would have said. I totally agree. I think the Mother of God is a model for all humanity. And when we try to limit her and say she's this or that, that doesn't work either. She is represented in the liturgical texts and in hagiography, and in lots of the tradition that we know and love today as really being a powerful figure, but also a humble figure. She's paradoxical in her person, in her just multifaceted aspect. And so to limit her to one thing or another, or to say she's removed from us, I simply can't agree with the question that you are asking. I think that sometimes comes from other parts of the Christian church where she may be viewed somewhat more narrowly. And I agree too that there are so many female models to follow, the saints, strong women, such as I mentioned before, and we really need to recover them and bring them to the fore in our tradition for the sake of our children, for all of ourselves, and just see womanhood as full of potential. I loved the image that Sister Vasa used of a flower, you know, that everyone has their gifts and should be allowed to flower in the church, and all genders really, and all of us can find our models in male and female figures within the church, and especially in the Mother of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will give a floor to Sister Vasa after I read what Jackie wrote to us, one of our participants. As a Catholic, we were always, as children and young adult women, told to model ourselves on Mary. After the birth of my first child, I truly understood Mary as mother of all people, not just women. Sister Vasa.
Yes, thank you also to just all these wonderful insights from Carrie and from Mary. So I just wanted to jump in and say that, well, the Mother of God also is the image of the church. So everybody who is church shares her vocation. And I just want to remember that in Luke 11:27, when the woman from the crowd tries to actually single out the Mother of God in a way, when she says, you know, blessed is the womb that bore you and the breast that nursed you, he seems to reject that. And at least he seems to find that not, you know, so important for her to know, because I think that lady was actually thinking, I wish I had a son like that. You know, your mother must be very proud, is like what she's saying. You know, maybe her son, I don't know, you know, is in prison or somewhere. But he says, you know, blessed rather, you know, and then I think he's pointing out, not that he, you know, doesn't admire and love his mother, but I think he's pointing out that which we share with her, you know, that we are called as church to, in every generation, right? I'm sorry, everybody knows this, but I have to get it off my chest anyway, to internalize the word, right, in our wombs, and then to share him in our context, you know, to give birth to him, so to say, in our world. And that's what every generation of Christians does, is give birth to Christ in that way. And that can be a painful, and is usually, you know, has that martyria, that pain. And those pains we share with her.
Thank you, Sister. And when you mentioned the word martyria, also the word witness comes, which is part of martyria and etymology of it. Father Andrew, we made the whole round of questions being asked and answers, and now this is for us a wonderful opportunity to hear your feedback, please. Thank you.
I don't know. I think probably the most important thing I am learning is just listening to women talking about the way they see things, because like behind this lies the fact that most of the time we spend our time listening to men in the church. Sermons usually by men, encyclicals come from bishops and patriarchs, and they're written by men. Even if they get women to contribute in some way to them, they still come with the authority of the patriarch, not a matriarch. The other thing, though, that I've kept on sort of hearing, sort of mutely, if you like, that Sister Vasa and others wanted to protest that gender isn't the important thing. What we are is less important than who we are. And all of us are who's, as it were. All of us can hear God's call and can respond to it as a who, not as a what. But nevertheless, in the church, we will do this in the context of a church that has been, where the models of authority have been masculine for 2 millennia. And I think that if we're going to bring the experience of women more into the center of the church, then I think what this must mean is that the notion of authority in the church itself needs to be modified. I think there seems to me there is a real danger of allowing women to exercise what are traditionally masculine roles, and they'll do this most easily by being masculine. And that seems to me to frustrate the whole point. It seems to me that we want our structures of authority to be challenged by those for whom I hope they feel foreign. And that doesn't, I mean, that also I think applies, it doesn't just apply to women, it applies to men too. There are ways in which men are expected to behave which seem to me to be dehumanizing. But it is very easy for a man to sort of fall into these ways because they're expected of him. You'll be encouraged to behave like that. But I think the opportunity that is presented by trying to consider the place of women in the church and women's ministry in the church is that it will give us an opportunity to call in question ways of understanding of authority and the exercise of authority in the church that belong to structures that I don't think can claim to be ultimate.
Thank you. This is an incredibly important point that relates to what Carrie was saying and also relates to what we've experienced so far in these webinars, when the question, when it unravels itself, is encompassing our whole experience. And I think that's the unique experience of the church. It cannot be segmented by whatever parameters. The living Christianity today is often an all-encompassing human and divine experience, the way that was demonstrated to us by Christ himself. And when we try to segment in order to encompass the conversation in one particular webinar or in 1 hour constraints, it's a hugely challenging topic, and I would be the first one to admit to it. There are constraints of our human ability to address this or the other issue, and the challenge of these webinars is not to rock the boat, which is already pretty rocket, and I'm using the typology of the church as being the boat. You don't want to give a disadvantage to the church by vocalizing the problematic issues, but there is no other way to address it. By carpeting and not addressing the problematics, you're probably...
On the contrary, I think we need to. I think we do need to upset the boat. It may be going very, very efficiently in the wrong direction. And I think that and I think also you say, you know, we mustn't segment authority. Look, authority is already very heavily segmented. And I don't think that we're not going to get very far if we think that we can just simply open up the experience of the church to what is in fact more than half of its constituency. Do that just simply by left hand down a bit, as it were, on the tiller. It's more serious than that, I think.
Thank you. That is a very important point coming from you especially. There are people writing their feedback and their questions, and I'm trying to address them. However, I would like to encourage people also to ask their question in a mode of the conversation when we can hear each other and have a feedback. So please feel free to speak if you wish. I also ask our panelist guests if you want to contribute to something that's been said, please feel free and let me know.
May I contribute?
Absolutely, Carrie, absolutely.
Yes, so just building on what Father Andrew has said here, I agree with what he said, and I would like to add some thoughts here, which are that, thinking about our basic anthropology and, our value that we place on the who, in addition to that, I would say that we also value our lived experience, our embodied experience as human beings. And part of that reality is that women have different embodied experiences than men. And we experience, especially since we have this 2,000-year history of a church that has been run by men, and a church, the authority structures have been defined by men, as Father Andrew pointed out. That has led to a really different lived experience for women in the church. And so to me, this is one of the reasons that speaks so strongly to there being roles for women's ministries in the church, such as reviving the role for deaconesses in the church. The church needs women in these roles. We need to experience what it's like to have women ministering in these ways, so that we have this opportunity for women to minister not just to women, but to the whole church in this capacity, so that we have the church being infused with this lived experience of women that we have not benefited from. We've been lacking this entire capacity from half of our church from so long. To me, this has been like a grave disparity, and it's been a real loss, both on the part of women who have been called to this sort of ministry, and the rest of the church that has just simply been deprived of this for so long.
Thank you very much, Carrie. And I often think, how are the ways to address this issue without invocating feminism or very heavily loaded definitions that you need to be protected from now. And yet we need to pay tribute to feminism, because a few centuries ago women were not allowed to have education, and here we have 4 women with PhD degrees, with professorial positions, some of us, not me including, but what I'm saying is there's been a fruit of feminism that we're benefiting from as women, and we cannot just bluntly reject it because it's a heavily loaded definition that often does us injustice. And we don't need to bring feminism to the Orthodox Church. I don't think this is the right way. We need to create the reality of talking about women, of developing theology and tradition surrounding women, and maybe we need to find another name for it, because it's too charged and it does us injustice. And I don't think that the definitions as such, be it feminism or the heavy loaded reality of ordination, is the way to address those conversations. They need to be put in the open for an open discussion, when the shared opinions and variety of opinions can be shared, and when we can, as a church, as the body of Christ, as the community of people, can demonstrate our ability to listen to each other and to exercise loving kindness to each other. And after our previous webinar, when we talked on human sexuality, the humanity was the most important question. We're lacking humanity. Nobody's expecting the heights of love from Christians anymore. In our witness, we are hitting the good conduct if we're just human to each other. And we are often depriving this martyria, this testimony to the world as a church, as a church who is protecting its boundaries rather than inviting a communication of love and humanity. And I think this is pretty much relating to our conversation today as well. Teva, did you unmute yourself for the purpose?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to what you're saying and what others have said. I think a lot of times the church, well, I have a lot to say, I'm not sure how to say it. First of all, women's issues don't seem to be of primary importance to the church at large. When you speak to people, we have so many other problems, we can't deal with that. Secondly, it's very easy to dismiss them by invoking terms such as quote unquote feminism and whatever definition, whatever that might mean to other people. And then we get into this either or situation where, well, we can't do that until we become more loving Christians. Not to minimize what you said, Elena, I'm just trying to kind of put it in generalities, or until we totally restructure what we mean by servant leadership. And I would like to put the proposal forward that this is not an either or question, that we need to, once that seeing women in ministries helps to get people and the fruit of those ministries for the benefit of the church, not just someone's own personal aggrandizement, is a vehicle for actually helping us to move forward. So it's not like, well, we can't do this until we do X, Y, and Z, but it's allowing us to see, to experience having women ministry and see the benefits of that opens people's hearts and minds on a personal level and takes something out of a very theoretical discussion and personalizes it and allows us to see them as humans, not as objects, women not as objects, but as a person who actually is ministering in such and such a capacity. And I think that's one way that we often overlook to be able to move this conversation and this issue forward. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much to everyone. It's been most encouraging conversation. I only lament that people didn't ask questions live, but there's been so many comments and I cannot possibly vocalize them all. I think quite a lot of them addressed to everyone. So I thank you very much for that and for your encouragement. And I would like to invite you to follow on with our webinars with this series and join us for our next webinar on the 17th of May at 7 p.m. And it will be titled The Challenges of Modernity. And we'll have wonderful guests present as well. And especially I would like to thank our present guest panelists for coming here and offering your thoughts and exchanging opinions. This is more than we could hope for. And the recording will be available and people can carry on in educational initiative. And once again, thank you for being here, and I hope to see you again.